Then once you agree on the final shape, then we are going to use calibrated diamond burrs, and you don't need fancy burrs. You need just round burrs that will allow you to notch the facial surface using the shank of the burr on the facial surface like you see here. And I must tell you, there is no way I would imagine doing that today without electric end pieces. We use electric because you have high torque and very low speed. Otherwise, the shank of the burr is going to burn the resin and you will lose the reference in your reduction. So you don't need these fancy burrs with diamond rings, but just round burrs. And you want to use two sizes, not one single size, because the cervical aspect requires less reduction than the incisal aspect. So the large burr, you see an example of the burr that I'm using here, is used to make the first groove horizontally from mesial to distal of the whole segment to prepare. Sometimes you cut mainly a resin, sometimes you cut resin and enamel, sometimes you are going to make the groove into resin, enamel and dentin. Doesn't matter. The idea is to create a uniform reduction. After you do the same thing on the cervical, you are going to pop off the resin. You don't need the mock-up anymore, and you are going to prepare with a regular chamfer burr by simply removing the surface of enamel until the black marks disappears. And if you do that in a very rational way, by the fact this is all described in the literature and published, so I will provide my email address at the end, so you can write to me, and I will be more than happy to send you copies of these articles. If you do that correctly, you will have a very uniform reduction like this. Don't forget to check that the clearance is present not only at the incisal edge, but also at the more cervical part of the restoration, so that spaces is given uniformly. As I said, on the cervical, less reduction is needed, usually 0.3 millimeter in the cervical versus 0.6, 0.7 millimeter in the incisal part. When I say 0.3, I mean really at the chamfer, at the margin of the restoration. Then you will check the incisal clearance. We usually try to reduce the incisal edge until we have a uniform 1.5 and more millimeter of space at the incisal edge, and then the finishing is really essentially to round off all the transition line angles. I use a lot of these flexible soft flex discs. And finally, before I take the impression, I'm going to open the interdental space to allow the impression material to freely flow through the space and reproduce accurately the margin. We have a burr kit that Brasler asked me to put together for them. It is called the Center for Excellence in Biomimetic and Restorative Dentistry kit. All the burrs I described are here. Again, what is absolutely of paramount importance in the tooth preparation technique is that the very last procedure you need to do before taking your impression is identifying dentin and seal dentin straight away. That's a key element. I will explain why. And you can easily identify dentin by using phosphoric acid for about 2-3 seconds, just to make enamel look dull. And then everything that shines after you rinse and etch, everything that is shiny you see here, you know this is dentin. And this is very easy to address. Now you take a burr, you are going to roughen dentin to have a freshly cut dentin surface, and you are going to apply your favorite dentin boning agent. Freshly cut dentin is ideal for adhesion. You will need to cure the adhesive after you place it. This is also recognized to be critical for the quality of adhesion. If you seal dentin now instead of doing it later at the time of cementation, you allow the stress-free development of the dentin bone. This is another advantage. It will protect the tooth against sensitivity during the provisional phase also, and protect against bacterial infiltration during the provisional phase. So there are only advantages in sealing dentin right now before you take your impression. And there's an additional advantage, which is when the patient comes back for final placement, you will maybe not even need anesthesia unless for the placement of rubber dam. And we have a significant amount of data now that I could show you about the quality of the bond when dentil is sealed immediately versus if you seal dentin after, at the time of cementation. It is too late because you cannot pre-cure efficiently the adhesive at that stage. Otherwise it would make a too thick layer that would interfere with the seating. And because you can't pre-cure, the hybrid layer is going to collapse and separate from the overlaying composite that you use for cementation. Other authors showed that with the delayed sealing, you create up to 80%, 85% of internal opening in your margins versus in your interface versus 7% only when dentin is still straight after preparation, before impression. And I could make a long discussion on what is the best adhesive today. I must tell you, 4th generation, I explained at the beginning why, and I like a field adhesive resin to make a consistent layer that can be later easily roughened by microsandblasting, which is proven to be the best way to bond again to this existing layer. And that's why OptiBond FL is almost the only one on the market, which is a 4th generation dentin bonding agent, 3-step etch and rinse. You remember what I told you at the beginning. You cannot mix all these products and get the same result. 50% filler in weight in the adhesive resin, in this case bottle number 2. And it is a golden standard in dentin bond strip. OptiBond FL was marketed in the early 90s, and it's a long track record on this material. In the recent issue, December, of the Journal of Prosthetic Dentistry, we demonstrated that one of the main criticisms of the technique is how do you bond to the existing adhesive layer at the time of cementation. And we could demonstrate that by using microsandblasting on the existing adhesive that you placed maybe 2 or 3 weeks before, microsandblasting will be enough to reactivate that layer and allow the fresh layer of resin to bond. And it's the control group, which is the direct adhesion using still an inhibition layer on the material, versus delayed, or let's say immediate dentin sealing and bonding to the existing adhesive. You see there is no difference in the quality of the bond as long as it is microsandblasted ahead of time, ahead of cementation. And you see most of the samples in this study, when using immediate dentin sealing, didn't fail between the bond and the old bond and the new bond. They failed cohesively into dentin in this micro-tensile test. Okay, so let's go through the step-by-step in this technique of immediate dentin sealing, and it's very, very simple. After your preparation is considered finished and acceptable, you will take a diamond burr and you freshly cut the dentin. Make sure it's uncontaminated. Straight after that, you take your etching agent, phosphoric acid, 37%, for about 15 seconds. That's the recommended procedure with OptiBond FL. You then rinse and suction dry. You don't need to air dry. You can suction dry the excess of water. And then you are going to do a dentin, I like to say a dentin spa, but that means massaging dentin with the hydrophilic monomer contained in the primer. So you just take bottle number 1, and with a micro brush you are going to brush, brush, brush and massage dentin. The hydrophilic monomer will diffuse over the entire tooth surface. Doesn't matter, it doesn't create a perceptible thickness. You want then to thin the primer and evaporate the solvent, and you do that very simply by suctioning again It should leave a very shiny, but not completely wet, but shiny surface like that. You can still see the burr marks on the dentin. Then you are going to take the adhesive resin and very gently apply the resin like a liner. And you are not going to air thin this layer, just apply it. I usually use a periodontal probe, and with one drop on the tip of a probe, I can just apply the resin to the area that I need without air thinning. Usually one drop will cover 1/3 of the facial surface of the incisor. After that, you would carefully light cure, and you still need, after light curing, you still need to apply an air barrier. In this case, a glycerin jelly, KY jelly works very well. So a KY jelly air barrier is applied to the surface of dentin and the entire tooth actually, and you air block the surface and then light cure again for about 10 seconds. The glycerin is eliminated by water rinse, and you see the perfect glazed, if you want, shiny surface of dentin, and this should allow you a very clean impression. The air blocking is very important, otherwise if you leave the inhibition layer during impression, it is going to interfere with your impression material, it's going to bond together, you will have very inaccurate impressions.